Bienvenidos a Panamá.
¡Bienvenido a Panamá!
Viva Panamá.
The Panama Canal. Joining two mighty oceans, this man-made waterway altered the course of world events. A new nation was created. Historic alliances formed, reputations made, and destroyed. With the first rush of water into the massive canal locks, the balance of global power shifted. An epic undertaking. People of virtually every nation were affected. Even today, the Panama Canal influences the destinies of millions of lives. The story of the Panama Canal is one of uncompromising visions, scandalous failures, and incalculable human sacrifice. From Spanish explorer Vasco Núñez de Balboa's earliest ambitions to Frenchman Ferdinand de Lesseps' painful defeat, from U.S. President Teddy Roosevelt's Big Stick campaign to all those who today handle the lines, pilot the ships, operate the traffic's control center. This is that story. The Republic of Panama, a vibrant country of 2.5 million people, a land renowned for its passionate politics, international commerce, and colorful cultures. Located 9 degrees north of the equator, Panama stretches 400 miles northwest to southeast, joining Central and South America. Shaped like a recumbent S, Panama has a high arcing isthmus, making it possible to see the sunrise out of the Pacific from the southern end of the canal. A narrow ribbon of land, Panama, at its widest point, is only 120 miles across. A fact valued equally by early explorers and modern-day shipping magnates seeking a shortcut around the world. But it was the 50-mile-long Panama Canal that established this tiny, tropical nation as a crossroads of the world. The Panama Canal is a vital link in world trade routes, influencing international trade patterns, spurring growth in developed countries, and giving impetus to emerging economies, providing a short, relatively inexpensive passageway between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Ships moving between the eastern United States and the Pacific Rim make up the bulk of the vessel traffic through the canal. The second busiest route is between Europe and the west coast of the United States and Canada. And increasingly, Central and South America are sending cargo ships through this man-made waterway. The canal drastically reduces the distance ships must travel between ports. A cargo freighter sailing from New York to San Francisco, for example, saves 7,872 miles by using the Panama Canal. To date, there have been more than 775,000 transits of the Panama Canal, carrying in excess of 5 billion long tons of cargo to ports around the globe. Canal operations are funded with tolls paid by transiting vessels. The amount is dependent on the ship's cargo carrying capacity. Today, the average toll paid by ocean-going commercial vessels is about $34,000. In 1928, Richard Halliburton paid just 36 cents to swim the Panama Canal. The passage of both ships and time here inspires awe. The majestic sweep of cruise ships' bow, the sheer size of high seas freighters, and for those on board, that remarkable sensation of 52 million gallons of water surging beneath the hull as ocean liners are lifted up and over the land that separates one great ocean from another. The Panama Canal is a year-round, round-the-clock operation. As day fades, high-mast lights turn on another world. Clusters of 1,000-watt metal halide lamps on 100-foot poles illuminate a determination to defy nature that is characteristic of the canal's history.
4 and 4, nightfall stand-up.
Nightfall is no reason to stop work here. Not even disease, death, and calamitous landslides stop those who built the canal. They were a determined lot, as are those who operate the waterway today.
You can get in the spill in the next minute or two.
Most ships spend barely 24 hours in Panama Canal waters and just 8 to 10 in actual canal transit. On average, a staggering 12,500 canal transits are completed each year. It's an impressive record and one reason why so many still follow this course. A course charted by ancient mariners and carved out by 20th century visionaries. One of the first to attempt passage through Panama was Spanish explorer Vasco Núñez de Balboa in the year 1501. Balboa would not succeed, but that did not keep Spain from claiming the land for their own and establishing settlements in both the Atlantic and Pacific coast. Plundering the Inca Empire of Peru, the Spanish amassed great wealth. They attempt to keep it by building huge stone fortresses, but they could not build walls high enough. In 1671, the British pirate Henry Bloody Morgan sailed up the Chagres River to ravage the city, now known as Panama Viejo or Old Panama. Only the magnificent El Altar de Oro, or Golden Altar, was spared by Morgan. Worshippers still kneel at this altar, which today graces St. Joseph's Church in the old section of modern Panama City. Made of pure gold leaf over carved mahogany, legend has it that a quick-thinking priest saved the altar by partly dismantling the Baroque masterpieces and submerging them in the sea. What he couldn't take apart, he whitewashed. Bloody Morgan went on his way, none the wiser. Eventually, the Spanish would abandon hopes of establishing a Panamanian crossing. They would not be the last to try and fail. The Great Gatun Locks. A short distance from where Balboa stepped ashore is the Atlantic entrance to the Panama Canal. When these locks were completed in 1913, they were among the largest man-made structures on Earth. Today, shipbuilders carefully craft vessels to fit the precise dimensions of the locks. Called Panamax, they are among the largest ocean-going vessels and the maximum size able to travel the canal. Still an impressive sight, the Gatun locks demonstrate a perfect balance of form and function. But had the French had their way, there would be no locks on the canal. Nearly 400 years after the Spanish gave up, the French decided they would be the ones to cut the course across the isthmus. In the summer of 1875, Ferdinand de Lesseps announced he would build an interoceanic canal through the Isthmus of Panama. The French were wild with excitement. De Lesseps had already made history once by completing the Suez Canal. Ambitious, egotistical, and with enviable energy, the 74-year-old de Lesseps began making plans to build the Panama Canal before even visiting the country. He decided a sea-level canal similar to the Suez should be built parallel to the Panama Railroad. On paper, it looks simple enough. In practice, it would prove impossible in this tropical wilderness of dense rainforest, deep swamps, and unstable hillsides. Ignorant of the climate, the mud, the ticks, chiggers, poisonous snakes, and deadly disease, the French thought they would find high romance in building the Panama Canal. Thousands of Lesseps' countrymen signed on to dig. Among them was a young artist, Paul Gauguin. Gauguin was struck by the uncivilized beauty of the place, but he was surrounded by death. Men were dying faster than they could be buried of smallpox, typhoid, snake poisoning, malaria, and yellow fever. Even in the hospitals, men were dying at a horrifying rate. Although well-equipped and staffed, the hospitals did not have screened windows, and outside in the gardens, mosquitoes were breeding in crockery rings of water placed around the base of plants to protect them from leaf-cutter ants. At times, the uncontrollable shivering of men stricken with malaria was so violent that their beds shook. Those with yellow fever suffered even more. Seized first with fits of shivering, high fever, and insatiable thirst, they died spitting up mouthfuls of dark blood. Vomito negro. Less than half survived. Doctors did not know that mosquitoes carried malaria and yellow fever. Instead, they blamed the twin plagues on noxious night air. Funeral trains ran daily to a cemetery at Mount Hope. Ditch diggers became grave diggers. More than 20,000 would die before the French would concede defeat in Panama. But it was not the mounting death toll that eventually forced the French to withdraw. It was the mounting debt. In truth, no amount of money would have been enough. A sea-level canal was simply not feasible. Technology had yet to catch up with the Lesseps' dreams. On May 15, 1889, workers were told to lay down their picks and shovels. The failure was a $300 million scandal that nearly toppled the French government and set the stage for America's rise as an economic and military power. Theodore Roosevelt was adamant. If America was to become a global power, it needed a canal joining the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Roosevelt had assumed the presidency in 1901 after an assassin's bullet ended the life of William McKinley. Addressing Congress for the first time, he declared, "A canal must be built." Congress could not resist Roosevelt, an indomitable force. But the Colombian government, which controlled the Isthmus of Panama, was not so enthusiastic. Negotiations dragged on. Then, on November 3, 1903, a group of prominent Panamanians staged a coup. With the help of the United States military, they declared independence from Colombia. In less than 24 hours, the independent Republic of Panama had been established. 6 months later, Old Glory was raised at the Grand Hotel in Panama City. Following the briefest of ceremonies, new digging equipment from the United States was unloaded, and the Americans went to work. For the sum of $10 million, the Republic of Panama had granted the United States the right to build a canal and given it sovereign authority over the newly designated Canal Zone. The Americans dug in quickly, but accomplished little that first year. As Roosevelt would later describe it, things were a devil of a mess. At 52, Stevens was widely considered the best construction engineer the United States had to offer. A tall, broad-shouldered man with a rugged face and manner to match, Stevens had unreserved faith in his own abilities and those of ordinary men. But he was also a realist. He knew men could not succeed without the right tools and reasonable living conditions. After surveying the chaotic construction sites, the better equipment and wretched housing provided to laborers, Stevens ordered a complete work stoppage. "The digging is the least thing of all," he declared. "First, Panama must be made a fit place to work." This was just the order Dr. William Gorgas had been waiting for. Pneumonia, tuberculosis, chronic diarrhea, and dysentery were rampant. Malaria was epidemic, yellow fever nearly so. It was essential to control all disease, but yellow fever had to be attacked first. To rid Panama of yellow fever, Gorgas said, was to rid it of fear. Contrary to established medical beliefs, Gorgas was certain mosquitoes carried the parasites that caused malaria and the yellow fever virus. And so, with Stevens' support, he began an all-out assault on the bloodthirsty insects. Fumigation brigades were formed. Hundreds of men hauling ladders, paste pots, buckets, Rolls of brown paper and insecticides went house to house. Others drained and swept ditches, reducing the insects' breeding area. Still more men swung machetes, clearing the dense brush and swamp grass that harbored swarms of mosquitoes. Roads were paved, sewer systems were built, and perhaps most importantly, city residents were provided running water, eliminating the need for domestic water barrels and cisterns, where mosquitoes bred by the millions. More than 4,000 men were assigned to the cleanup, and supplies requisitioned by the shipload. 4,000 buckets, 3,000 garbage cans, 1,000 brooms, 1,200 fumigation pots, 500 scrub brushes, 240 rat traps, 120 tons of pyrethrum powder, 300 tons of sulfur, 50,000 gallons of kerosene, 5,000 pounds of common soap. Gorgas was leading the most costly and concentrated cleanup campaign the world has seen. Meanwhile, Stevens had to overcome three major problems. The first was a rugged mountainous stretch of land nearly 312 feet above sea level. The second, torrential rainfall and rapidly rising rivers. The third, what to do with all the dirt that would be dug up. Stevens proposed building a series of locks and lakes. Ships entering from the Pacific would sail through two sets of double locks that would raise them 85 feet. Then enter a channel that was to be gouged and blasted through mountains. Crossing the continental divide, ships would enter a huge lake created by damming the raging Chagres River. Finally, entering the Gatun Locks, which would lower ships 85 feet to the level of the Atlantic Ocean. When a ship entered the locks, valves would be open, allowing water to rush in from the lake. No pumps would be needed. Gravity would be enough. In this way, Stevens would make use of the area's most abundant natural resources. Rainwater from the highlands, especially that flowing in the Chagres River, would supply water to the canal. A dam would be built on the river to control the flow. Earth from the excavation would be used as building material. The plan was simple but brilliant. Decades later, Stevens' basic design is still considered virtually flawless.
The canal has survived so many years because of the simplicity of its design. It's just an elevator. It's something that kids play with by having a couple of bottles and joining them together and raising and lowering pools of water. It's just a very simple elevator. We don't pump any water, it's just using the force of gravity.
By 1906, Stevens had 24,000 men sweating and straining in the steaming jungle. Roosevelt just had to see it for himself. Never before had a president left the country while in office, but Roosevelt wanted to see Panama, preferably at its worst. He sailed for Panama on November 9, 1906, aboard the new 16,000-ton Louisiana, the largest battleship of the American fleet. With him were Mrs. Roosevelt, a Navy doctor, and 3 Secret Servicemen. It rained almost the entire time. "I tramped everywhere in the mud," he reported later with great satisfaction. It would have been impossible to see work going on under more unfavorable conditions. Roosevelt was delighted. Stevens, on the other hand, was bored with the rain, the mud, and what he described as an immense amount of detail. In a letter to Roosevelt, he said he wanted out. Roosevelt was outraged. Vowing to put a man in the job who couldn't quit, Roosevelt appointed Army engineer Lieutenant Colonel George Washington Goethals. A model officer, Goethel's style was cool, correct, and dignified. He was to have absolute authority over construction of the canal and a raise in pay to go along with his new responsibilities. He would receive $15,000 a year, about half the salary paid to Stevens. Excavation was only beginning when Goethals took charge in 1907. The building of the Gatun Dam and design and construction of the locks had not yet begun. Although these were tasks of historic magnitude, requiring superior technical expertise, Goethals would handle them expertly. Goethals' workforce consisted largely of unskilled laborers. The vast majority were from neighboring Caribbean countries. Desperately poor, they had come to Panama to work for 10 cents an hour, 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. The most difficult and dangerous jobs were at Culebra Cut, later renamed in honor of Colonel David Dubois Gaylord. Gaylord was in charge of blasting the 8.5-mile channel across the Continental Divide. The job seemed nearly impossible. By noon, the temperature in the cut could be 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Combined hard rock and loose shale made digging slow, exhausting, and risky. Daily downpours were followed by massive mudslides. Workers called the place Hell's Gorge. After one particularly deadly avalanche, Gaylord said it was as if he and his men were damned to eternal digging. But progress was being made. 50 to 60 steam shovels were going around the clock. The debris dumped into special one-sided flatbed railroad cars that rolled by non-stop. And were emptied by a special device that could clear an entire flat car with a single sweeping motion. The volume of earth that had to be moved was phenomenal. Writers of the time said the spoil would be enough to build the Great Wall of China from San Francisco to New York. In reality, the spoil was being used to build the Gatun Dam, the largest earthen dam in the world. It was designed to hold back the Chagres River. It's an incredible sight yet today. 1.5 miles long and rising 105 feet above sea level. The damming of the Chagres created the largest man-made lake in the world at that time, Gatun Lake. Stretching 23.5 miles from Gatun Locks to the north end of Gaylord Cut, the lake covers an area of more than 163 square miles. Hundreds of tiny islands are scattered in the lake, including the Barro Colorado Island, a world-renowned tropical rainforest research station operated by the Smithsonian Institute. But not even the massive Gatun Dam could hold all the excavation debris. Dirt by the long tons was dumped offshore to build a breakwater and causeway joining Panama's Pacific Barrier Islands. Today, this string of tiny islands is a recreation paradise. there was little time for recreation during construction of the Panama Canal. The sheer magnitude of the undertaking challenged comprehension by even the best minds. Everything was on the scale of giants and gods. At the time they were built, the enormous canal locks were the largest concrete structures in the world. Each lock chamber is 1,000 feet long, 110 feet wide, and 82 feet tall. The rail system was designed to haul untold quantities of sand, gravel, and Portland cement to and from massive mixing plants. Dry materials were dumped from rail cars on one side of the track, as cars on the opposite side were being filled with the wet mix. It is estimated a staggering 12 million cubic yards of concrete were poured. The lock forms were constructed in 36-foot sections, then moved into position. At Gatun locks, towering cranes lifted the buckets of concrete weighing up to 1,000 pounds so the wet mix could be poured into the forms. Completing the locks were 700-ton steel gates. Constructed in the same manner as ships, the bottom half of each gate lift was fitted with a watertight compartment. Once water entered the locks, the huge gates virtually floated, requiring an engine no bigger than an outboard motor to open and close. Construction of the canal was one of the great spectacles of the age. Tourists came by the thousands to watch the work, spellbound by the thunderous force of change. More than 61 million pounds of dynamite was used to construct the canal, producing more explosive power than had been expended in all wars fought up to then. At least half the labor force was involved in dynamite work. Hundreds were maimed or killed by premature blast. Recalling the frequent triac explosions, a West Indian laborer said, "The flesh of men flew in the air like birds many days." For 7 years, Gaylor Cut reverberated with the sound of dynamite blasting. With the sound of trains, steam shovels, and rock drills, the noise level was so extreme that some men literally went deaf. Others, unable to hear warning calls or sirens over the racket, died, crushed beneath the wheels of trains or struck by flying rock. On May 20th, 1913, 2 steam shovels met at the bottom of Gaylor Cut and sounded a final whistle. The work was done. The channel, as deep as men could make it, now just 40 feet above sea level. The channel was flooded and the remaining excavation completed by dredge. In all, 96 million cubic yards of earth had been gouged from this mountainous reach of the isthmus. The spirit of innovation that made success possible in 1913 still exists today, with the Panama Canal engaged in international collaborations.
The canal is involved not only in the transiting of ships, but it's involved in water management, and being involved in water management, that opens up a number of fields, of engineering fields that have application here. Plus, even in the area of geotechnical engineering, because of the fact that to build the canal, there was a very large cut through the continental divide here.
On September 26, the tugboat Gatun made the first trial voyage across Panama. A photographer, standing in a cement bucket suspended from a crane, captured the historic event. 11 months later, August 15, 1914, the Panama Canal officially opened. 6 months ahead of schedule and $23 million under budget. But there was no crescendo of cheers, no congratulations from world leaders. Europe was at war. Open to all nations, the Panama Canal is required by treaty to remain neutral during times of peace and war. The United States does, however, have the right of limited intervention to defend the canal against attack. Because of the canal's strategic location, defense of the canal is paramount to the United States. That concern is evidenced by the numerous visits of U.S. presidents. Over the years, Uncle Sam's soldiers have intervened in Panama's political affairs. On December 20th, 1989, U.S. President George Bush ordered an all-out assault, dubbed Operation Just Cause, against Panama's self-proclaimed dictator, Manuel Noriega. American troops stormed Panama intent on ousting Noriega. The Panamanian strongman sought asylum in the Vatican embassy. American troops surrounded the embassy, set up loudspeakers, and blasted the building with rock and roll music. Noriega finally surrendered himself to American forces. Although Panamanian civilians were no targets of Operation Just Cause, men, women, and children were killed. Panama and the United States are now forging a new relationship into the 21st century. U.S. President Jimmy Carter is credited with initiating that process. It was during his administration that new treaties were signed, giving control of the canal to Panama as of noon December 31st, 1999. For the Panamanians, the goal is to maintain the canal's efficiency and increase opportunities for trade and related economic activity. Over the years, Panama has become a banking center for Latin America. 122 international banks with assets of $37 billion are now located in Panama City. But some of the most exciting activity is still found along the canal, in Panama's working harbors. Two busy ports have grown up with the canal: Cristobal on the Atlantic and Balboa on the Pacific. The ports are constantly in motion. Cargo, from coffee beans to luxury cars, passes through here daily, destined for all points on the globe. More than half the Panamanian population lives in Panama City, the capital of Panama. This city goes around the clock just like the canal. In unceasing pursuit of its future, modern Panama City nevertheless gives way gracefully to old Panama. In Casco Viejo, that section of the city built by Spaniards after Bloody Morgan's destructive raids, children play in cobblestone streets. And neighbors still visit from 17th century wrought iron balconies. Past and present are near perfectly integrated in Stevens Circle, teeming with sidewalk vendors. This is where the Kuna Indians of Panama's San Blas Island sell their intricate embroidery works called molas, a native craft taught by mothers to daughters. Cunas straddle two worlds, one of their own design, the other created by the canal builders. The two Panamas are woven together here in Stevens Circle. In the center of the circle is a monument to engineer John Stevens, designer of the canal's master plans. Stretching northeast from the circle is a palm-lined El Prado Boulevard, its grassy medians approximating the length and width of a canal lock chamber. At the far end of the boulevard is a 56-foot-high marble monument to Colonel George Goethals, who completed construction of the canal. The towering marble shaft rising from the fountain represents the Continental Divide and the canal's dependence on water. It is only a short distance to the stately Panama Canal Commission Administration building. The fountain's three pools represent the three sets of canal locks: Gatun, Miraflores, and Pedro Miguel. From the top of the broad steps is an impressive view of the Bridge of the Americas. Soaring 384 feet above the ocean, the Bridge of the Americas connects the east and west banks of the canal, reuniting the land divided during construction of the canal. A graceful structure, it beautifully frames the never-ending line of ships sailing to and from the canal. The remarkable voyage begins when a canal pilot boards a ship to guide it through the locks, lakes, and narrow Gaylor Cut. Reputed to be some of the world's best ship handlers, canal pilots assume complete responsibility for the safe navigation of transiting vessels. The Panama Canal is the only waterway in the world where the pilot boards and takes full control. Before commanding a ship, canal pilots must complete an intensive 8-year training program, including full bridge simulator training. Recreation is precise, from the ship's bridge to the stress of the job. Here, pilot trainees learn how to respond in crisis situations without danger of damage to property or loss of life. With a canal pilot at the helm, a ship moves into position. Canal boatmen in small crafts called pangas run heavy cables from the vessel to electric locomotives. Sometimes called mules, these locomotives are used to position and control ships in the lock chambers. Depending on vessel size, as many as 8 mules may be needed. Controllers at Marine Traffic Control Center are in constant contact with canal pilots. State-of-the-art computer equipment helps controllers direct the thousands of ships that yearly pass through the Panama Canal. A ship headed north from the Pacific to the Atlantic enters Miraflores locks first. The massive miter leaf gates closing behind it. Now, the lock's recess valves are opened, allowing water to rush into the chamber. Filling each chamber takes about 10 minutes. Once the water level in that chamber is the same as in the next, the gate between the two opens and the ship is moved forward. Now at 54 feet above sea level, the ship crosses Miraflores Lake, a small man-made body of water created by damming the Rio Grande. The ship approaches the Pedro Miguel locks. and in one step, the ship is raised to the level of Gaylor Cut and Gatun Lake, 31 feet, for a total of 85 feet. Here, the ship enters Gaylor Cut, where the canal cuts through the lowest saddle of the Continental Divide. In 1971, work was completed to widen the cut to 500 feet, but certain vessels, including Panamax ships, are restricted to one-way passage. Another multi-million-dollar widening program is currently underway. When the work is completed, the entire length of the canal will be open to virtually unrestricted two-way traffic. Progress has been made in landslide control, greatly reducing the threat of mud and rock avalanches. To the east is Gold Hill, the highest promontory along the channel, rising 662 feet above sea level. And on the west is Contractors Hill, where a monument honors the canal builders. Leaving the cut, ships pass the Chagres River, where it enters Gatun Lake and the settlement of Gamboa. The canal's dredging division has its headquarters here. More dirt has been removed since 1914 than was removed during the entire construction of the canal. On almost any given day, a variety of canal floating equipment may be seen at work on various maintenance projects. This floating crane, in use since 1915, is used for heavy lifting jobs, such as removing the lock gates during routine overhauls. A labor force of a good-sized industrial city is required to keep the Panama Canal open. There are approximately 7,500 permanent full-time canal employees engaged in an extraordinarily diverse range of occupations. Nearby is the Summit Gardens, a lush 300-acre park created by the United States in 1923. With some 15,000 species of exotic plants, dozens of brilliantly colored birds and rare animals, this sprawling garden is a favorite gathering place of Panamanians. At Gamboa, the ship enters Gatun Lake. Here, it is easy to see how Panama's incredible 100 inches per year of rain contributes to the canal's successful operation. The fresh water that fills this artificial lake flows from Panama's highlands, a dense tropical rainforest braided with streams and rivers, fed by heavy seasonal rains. Following the marked channel, ships travel across the lake at cruising speed. The route is roughly 23 miles from the end of Gaylor Cut to the Gatun Locks. Following the old Chagres riverbed, the route winds between islands that once were hilltops in the Chagres Valley. Far below the surface of the water are the ruins of villages that were flooded when the lake was filled. At the Gatun Locks, vessels are lowered 85 feet in 3 steps. back to the Atlantic Ocean, where the remarkable story in our journey through this man-made waterway began. The Panama Canal. For the dreamers, designers, and builders, there could be no greater achievement. For today's ocean-going travelers, there may be no more profound a passage than the Panama Canal.